was born in Baltimore, Maryland, 7 December 1920.
Wow.
I lived in Baltimore up until about the early 30s, at which time my parents moved to Salisbury, and I was brought up in Salisbury for the balance of the time. You know, as a kid during the Depression, and we didn't know it was a depression. We didn't have all the nice food we liked. Ice cream would have been out of this world. And as kids, we didn't know we were poor. Everybody on the block was in the same boat, so it wasn't. But Mom and Dad did. I'm sure they suffered. Dad always had a job, and we lived on the verge of everything. It was just a case of making the best of what you can do. I can recall when we lived on Port Street in Baltimore. He'd go to work every morning. He'd give my mother 25 cents. And before Boots and I went to school, we'd walk down to the corner grocer and buy a bag of coal. And that had to last in the cook stove for all day for cooking and heating, because he just didn't make enough money to heat the house.
Yeah.
So we lived basically in the kitchen.
Okay, so you all
Except the
stayed.
bedrooms, yeah.
Okay.
But again, you know, it was a bad time for us, not for the kids.
Sure, because you don't really know any better.
Right, but Mom and Dad, I know they suffered. Well, I went to school in what we call elementary today, in I think 83, number 83 school in Baltimore. And then when we moved down to Salisbury, we went to elementary school there, and then I went to junior high school.
How old were you when you moved to Salisbury?
I guess about 12 or 13.
Okay, so was that maybe 6th, 7th grade, something like that?
Yeah. Like I said, it was, I thought it was junior high school. Anyhow, I had to leave. I had to leave school when I was 16, as soon as it was legal. I had to go to work to get a little income from my family. And consequently, I only had 1 year of high school. And that was it.
Yeah. Where did you work?
In Salisbury? Before the war, I worked in a shirt factory, and I worked in a filling station, and I worked in a hosiery mill, and I worked in a junkyard.
Okay.
And kids don't like to hear this. I worked in junkyard for $1 a day.
That was probably good money back then.
Well, it helped.
Yeah.
It bought a bag of groceries at the end of the week. Kids don't like to hear that today.
Yeah, no.
$5 a week for 40 hours of labor. They wouldn't work an hour for that.
Yeah, that is true.
And that's the extent of my education when I went in the service.
Okay. Now, how old were you on, well, which birthday was it when Pearl Harbor was attacked?
I became a man.
Okay, 21?
21.
Okay, so had you been following the events going on, like in the paper, in the newspaper, with what was going on in Europe or in Japan at that time? Did you kind of see it coming?
A little bit, not much. I'll see if I can. In 1939, my brother, he had joined the National Guard in the early 30s or the late 29s, I forget which. And in 39, early 39, he talked to me one day. He said, I want you to get into I Company down here for the Maryland National Guard, because we're going to have a war. He says, and I think you ought to be prepared. So I joined the Guard in July of 39, and I learned to soldier. And then in 1941, they had someplace up the top decided we better get ready, and they activated the 29th Infantry Division. On February the 3rd, we reported to Fort Meade,
Okay.
or well, shortly after. But we were activated on the 3rd of February, 1941 for 1 year.
Okay. Now, was your brother in the same unit with you?
Yes.
Okay.
He was a lieutenant by then.
Okay.
He had taken all the words and worked up
Okay. What was your rank at that point?
PFC.
Okay. Okay. You all got to start somewhere. Okay. So now, where were you on December 7th in 41?
Okay, we had gone to Fort Meade for our base, our prime camp, and we were on maneuvers in the Carolinas in late 41.
Okay.
And we were on our way home back to Fort Meade after maneuvers on December the 7th. We went through Richmond in a caravan or convoy, whatever, and we couldn't understand it. There were people out on the street watching us, standing on, and the women were there with babies in their arms, and some of these gals were crying. What's going on? What happened? So halfway up to A.P. Hill military reservation, where we were to spend the evening or the next week, word came down the line. Japs had attacked Pearl Harbor. Well, we went back to Fort Meade, which was base camp for the 29th Infantry Division, and then they moved us out of there down to A.P. Hill Military Reservation between Washington and Richmond.
Okay.
It's not a very, it's mostly open. There's not too many buildings. We lived in tents, and then while we were down there, with the war scare, each company in the 29th Infantry Division was sent to a different town in Pennsylvania to guard the civic installations. I company went to Harrisburg, and we were guarding, walking the bridges across the Susquehanna River, the gas works, the electric generating plant.
Any possible targets, right?
Yeah, war hysteria. It boiled down to nothing.
Yeah.
Well, anyhow, when they decided it wasn't going to happen, they moved us permanently out of Camp Meade, Fort Meade, to A.P. Hill. And it was while we were down there in, I think, February, a notice was up on the board. Air Corps was looking for air crew members. Did you know you can't be assigned to fly an airplane or be a crew member? You have to volunteer.
Oh, I didn't know that. I knew that for submarines, but okay.
Yeah,
Okay.
but for air crew members
was new,
too.
yeah.
You can't be assigned in against your will. I mean,
Okay.
you have to. I want to do it.
Okay. Does that also apply to ground crew or just
No,
for
just
the air crew?
just air crew people. But pre-war, there was a aviation cadet program, and in order to get into it, you had to be a college graduate or pass an exam, the equivalent of 2 years of college. 1 year of high school. Well, it's worth a chance. So anyhow, I put the papers in, and a short time later, a couple weeks, I got word to go up division headquarters. So went over there. The captain took me, sent me over in his Jeep. And when I get over there, the room's full of guys like me from all over the division. And at the final count, there were 205 of us. And we're sitting there, and all at once this God Almighty strode out onto the stage. It was a captain with a set of wings on his chest. God, I'll never forget that, to see this man who was actually flying airplanes. Anyhow, he explained what he was there for, that we had volunteered to go in, and what we had volunteered for, I had put down to be a pilot. I don't know what the other guys did. And we were getting a written exam. And he said, it's not going to be easy. He said, but do the best you can. No, we did. And when, about 3 hours of writing and sweating. And we went back after that, and about, I guess, 3 weeks later, get word to go back to division headquarters again. What's this for? Who knows? Go over there. There's 4 guys sitting in a room. And I made 5. And what are we here for? We don't know. So same captain came back on stage and said, hey guys, you are the 5 that passed the exam.
Oh.
Well, you know, in all sincerity and honesty to all these guys, most of them didn't have a high school education. A high school education was a fairly rare thing. College degree was almost an impossibility.
Sure.
5 of us out of 205. Bad enough. He says, you're going to get a physical tonight. Okay. So this doctor comes in, he gives us the most of the Air Corps physical, what he had the equipment for. Goodbye. Go back to your unit. And, came back one night from, one evening from a operation during the day, company tactics. And Captain Bird sent their runner down to the, well, whoever. And back to headquarters again. Okay. Go back over. I'm alone. I passed, the other 4 flunked.
Wow.
Now, people don't believe in miracles. I do. How in the name of heaven could I have gotten through that written exam combined with well, physically we all should have passed. But me out of 205 people, I can only ascribe it to a miracle. It had to be, you know, no education, and
Yeah.
I'm so thankful, of course.
Yeah, it worked out well for you.
Oh God, yes. And then this was about, let's see, February, March, April, about the end of April, beginning of May.
Okay, so
And
this
then
is 42, right?
yeah.
1942.
And then I got orders a couple days later, transferred to the Air Corps, and I was to go to Jefferson Barracks, Missouri. That was sort of a replacement depot for everybody who had passed the exams from all over the eastern part, possibly the whole United States. No, I would say just the eastern part of the U.S. It was a replacement depot for the farm out to flight schools and whatnot.
Okay.
So I was in June. My group was sent to Maxwell Field, Alabama, and since we were then we were designated potential aviation cadets after we passed another physical. So when most of us passed it then, and then we were given the title of aviation cadets, and I started pre-flight in July of 42. You went 2 months for pre-flight where you got everything you need to know about flying. The physics of it, the physical aspects, the biological, the whole thing.
Okay.
And then if you pass that, then they sent you to primary, which was your beginning of flying. First, finally, you were going to get into an airplane. I was assigned to Clarksdale, Mississippi, as a training base there, Fletcher Field, and you get 80 hours of flying if you don't wash out.
What kind of planes did they fly for training?
PT-17s. There's one hanging up out at the hangar there.
Okay.
The one with the 2 wings and
Is that the Yellow Peril?
Well,
Or-
that was the Navy's
That was
term
the other
for
one,
it.
okay.
We had a blue fuselage.
Okay.
Anyhow, after 80 hours, if you pass, then I was sent to basic training, which is a BT, basic trainer. We have one of those too, a low wing airplane. It's hanging up also. It's a little more advanced, more horsepower and whatnot. That was at Walnut Ridge, Arkansas. And then after your 60 days there, or 65, whatever, I had made a preference for single engine advanced, and they sent me to Craig Field, Selma, Alabama for single engine advanced. And I was successful. I got through it. I was commissioned in March of 1943 as a second lieutenant, and they gave me a set of wings.
All right.
How about that? Huh? And then disappointment. Oh Lord! There were my class was around 200 and some cadets that graduated, and they told us your orders will be posted on the bulletin board by your barracks. I go out and look, no name. Next day, no name. Next day, no name. And everybody else is getting their names. What's going on? So finally I think about the fourth day, the personnel major called us in. There were 12 of us. And I said, well, we asked questions. How come you're not going to get any orders for tactical units? You're going to be flight instructors here. Disappointment? I want to be a fighter
I'm
pilot.
gonna get in there, yeah.
Anyhow, they sent us back to our squadrons, and we were instructors in the sense that we only flew cadets on where we were monitoring them. We weren't instructing them. Back seat in the 6. And that lasted about a week. We got a call back to him. All 12 of us go in. He said, okay, guys, I got 6 assignments. Right. What do you got? B-24s. Bombers.
Liberators, yeah.
Another disappointment. So he said, I want volunteers. So 6 of the guys volunteered. They hated instructing these cadets so much. They volunteered to go into bombers. So that made me an official instructor. And it lasted for 3 months. In July, or let's see, about July, I got a transfer finally. This major was not my friend. I kept pestering him to get out, and he called me in one day and he said, I got your transfer. What is it? He says, you're going to Air Transport Command, twin engine miscellaneous. And I said, what's a twin engine miscellaneous? He says, it's probably P-38s, which was a fighter. Ah, great, I'll go. Yeah, Goonie birds. Billy Mitchell Field, Cudahy, Wisconsin. Before the war, the Air Corps didn't have too many 4-engine or 2-engine pilots. They had some, but they needed a lot more. So what the Air Corps had done, they went to all these, well, not all, but most of the commercial airlines at the time who set up flight instruction stations, and they trained us, the commercial airlines, trained military pilots to fly the Goonie birds. And our assignment was to Roanoke, Virginia for a month or so of indoctrination and flight training in a Goonie bird. And then we went to Washington, D.C., National Airport. We flew the line doing actually cargo work, but also learning a lot about how to fly across country, radio procedures, navigation, etc.
So were you flying supplies at this point now? across the country?
Internally, yes.
Okay.
Whatever, it was, one of our stops was at Fort Bragg, and we were offloading. So, well, of course, we were Army Air Corps. We were not the United States Air Force.
Right, not yet. Not
So
until,
we
what,
were all
46,
part of the
47.
Army.
Right.
And then that lasted until they figured, I guess, we were ready for better or more things, and they transferred me to St. Joe, Missouri then.
Okay.
And there the Air Corps taught us how to fly. We checked out in B-25s, AT-17s, and the proverbial Goonie bird, the C-47.
Okay.
When I finished there, sent me to Great Falls, Montana. That was a...
When about, chronologically, when is this now?
This
It's still
is-
42? Or are we into 43 now?
I guess we're close to 43. I think it was cold weather when we got up to Great Falls, because that was a cold station. Oh, man. Anyhow, I was only there a couple, well, not even 2 weeks, and they sent me to Palm Springs, California.
Nice.
And that's
Much
where
better.
I checked out in fighters,
Oh.
including that one. But it was not for combat. It was for ferry. I was in the ferry division,
Right.
and Ferry.
Mm-hmm.
So, and I made a couple ferry flights, one with 51, two with P-39s, one of them to Alaska, and then a Goonie bird up, and then they said, well, you're ready for overseas. So they shuffled me off to Reno, Nevada to check out the C-46s.
Okay.
And I got back, and they shipped me to Romulus. And then when they were ready, a couple days later, down to Savannah, Georgia, to Hunter Air Base. Picked up a crew in a B-25 and ferried it over to Corsica.
Okay. Now, how many were on the, like, did you had different crews all the time then? Is that correct? Or?
Yeah, we're not like bomber crews. They
Right.
are static.
Right.
We were pickup crews.
Okay.
But my crew from Hunter to Pisanakia in Corsica was the same. We kept there, and then that's where we split up. The crew went home, and my overseas orders were with me to report to Central African Wing at Accra. When I reported in for duty, the personnel officer said, here's what it is. He explained where they were. We had three stations. Accra was a home station. He says, you can't stay here. You'd have to go one of the others in Maiduguri, Aden, and Khartoum. They were our three. So the crews from Accra went to Maiduguri. Maiduguri crews went to Khartoum. Khartoum brought it to Aden. We took it to Karachi.
Okay.
And then it turned around and we all came back to reverse.
Okay. And what kind of supplies were you bringing?
Anything they needed and could get in the airplane.
Okay.
You just go out, the airplane's loaded. There was nothing transshipped for us, basically. If anything coming to Aden was offloaded and the airplane went back. Most of my flights were strictly pick up at Aden, Karachi. Okay. Originally, before I was in it, the ferry division, the guys would pick up an airplane here and take it there. Then they'd have to come home commercially.
Okay.
And somebody in high up said, this is a waste of people. Let's check them out in every airplane we can. And then you go from, all right, I've delivered the airplane, the P-51 to Newark. I went over to LaGuardia, got a ride to Buffalo, and got my P-39.
Okay.
See, otherwise I'd have had to fly all the way back to Great Falls. So it was a conservation. That's where these female pilots came in.
Yeah.
Oh, man.
Although they were just stateside, right?
Yeah, they were restricted here.
Okay.
General Arnold didn't want them overseas.
Now, did you come into contact with a lot of these female
No.
pilots? No.
I met one and talked to her casually at Love Field on my flight. And then when I came back from overseas, I was stationed at Wilmington, and that's where there were some more of the females. And I ran into one up there. I talked to more than the one at Love Field. And then I was only up at Wilmington because I requested a transfer to Fort Dix. There was a flight program. The war in Europe had ended, and they were bringing the troops home and getting them ready to go in the Pacific. So we were flying them from the East Coast to the West Coast, and we'd leave, take off out of Fort Dix, go up to Newark, pick up 21 troops, and take them to Nashville. And that was where the Central Division people picked the airplane up and took them through there to the Western Division. And then we caught an airplane coming back and came home. So that's where it was. Anything by air transport was basically high value, I need yesterday type stuff. And it was sort of a rush program to get it through as soon as possible. But it was only those routes. We had nothing else. There was no diversion. Yeah, we made a stop at Salalah once a month. Somebody did, to pay the man that owned the territory. He used to get 2 bags of Maria Theresa dollars. They were silver dollars, but he got 2 bags every month for the use of his ground.
Oh, interesting.
And then Salalah was our gas stop.
Now, where is Salalah?
It's an island off of the coast of Arabia on the southeast coast. You've read about it in the paper here during the thing in Iraq that we had it. But that was a refueling stop. We couldn't make it from Aden to Karachi nonstop.
So that was your refuel.
That left us, when we stopped at Salalah and refueled, we had 700 miles of water to go over, and then Karachi.
Now, did you ever have any problems with weather? I know the monsoons kind of come through that area.
No, not much.
No.
It was pretty good. We had sandstorms, but nothing significant. I don't recall ever being stopped or not being able to go because of weather. It just wasn't.
Tell me about, like, a typical day. How would your routine go when you're on that station?
Well, it all depended on our flight schedule. There was nothing scheduled that we were going to fly tomorrow at 2 o'clock. When the next airplane came through and you were number 1 on the list, you got the airplane, you went off.
Okay,
so that
it was in a rotation. Did you have any warning when?
No.
So
no,
you had to be on call all the time?
You hear a knock on the door 3 o'clock in the morning. You're alerted. So you get up and get dressed and go over and have a bite to eat. And you're off the ground by a couple hours later.
Okay. How long did the missions generally last?
Let's see, it was about 1,800 miles. They were counting the stop at Masira, between 10 and 11 hours normally, one way. Then we stay in Karachi until the next airplane came through and we come home.
You come home.
Because we only one at a time.
Okay. And were you normally flying the C-46s or 47s at this point?
A mix of 46s and 47, mostly 46s.
Okay. Which did you prefer to fly?
46.
Oh, the 46, yeah. I've heard that before.
That and this one over here, my 2 favorite airplanes.
Okay.
It was just something about an airplane. Every airplane is a little different. And this one, I don't know, just sort of settled on you.
Can you rotate it a little bit so we can see
this
the
way.
side of it? There we go. Look at that. Okay, so that's the C-46 Commando, is what it's called?
Yeah.
All right. So, in comparison to the 47, what made this one the better plane for you?
Well, it's more powerful, of course, bigger engines and higher altitude, faster. But it was just a pleasure to fly. You know, when you stand, you're at the end of the runway and you push those throttles up on this thing, those engines really took off.
There you go.
Yeah, that was a good airplane.
That's good.
It's unfortunate it never materialized much after the war, but it was a beautiful airplane. I liked it.
Did you fly those more frequently than the 47, or?
Oh yeah, I guess I had about almost 1,100 hours in Arabia flying, and I would guess 800 of them are in this.
Okay.
So,
Okay, so for
but
that was the one.
it was just a fun it was a fun airplane. When I went over there, the tour was 1 year due to the weather and whatever. It's mostly physical for the air. I don't know why it was different for us than ground people. Anyhow, most other overseas tours were 1,000 flying hours or 18 months.
Okay.
So I figured this 1 year is going to change. You know, nobody's getting sick and anything.
Right.
So I flew all I could. And sure enough, 9 months into the tour, notice come down. The tour's been changed. 1,000 flying hours or 18 months.
Okay.
And I'd gone over. One of my roommate at Roanoke, Virginia, in Goonie Birds, was there when I got there. And I left, and he was still there. Harry was not. He was a fair pilot, I'd say. He's safe, but he was not gung ho, and he just sort of took his time, slowly going through things. And I told him one day while we were having dinner together, I said, Harry, you better get knocking or you can be here 18 months. Nah, nothing like that. I caught up with him. I don't know when he left, but that was the last time I ever saw him. But I had flown a little over 1,000 hours when the thing came through.
And how long had you been there when you got to that point then? 9 months,
a little over 12 months.
12 months, so you were there.
And I had made the minimum tour practically.
Okay. Now where did you go from there?
I was reassigned to Wilmington.
Okay. And you said you requested that?
No.
Or, no.
No, I had no choice.
Okay.
So I got up there and they said you can fly C-54s, which I'd checked out on overseas, or you can go to Fort Dix for this transcon.
Okay.
I didn't want to be away from home real quick anymore, so I told them, let me fly transcon. So they transferred me to what was then Fort Dix Army Air Base. And I flew transcon until Japanese surrender.
Okay.
And then that stopped because we weren't going to move the troops anymore.
Right. Okay. Now where were you when you heard about the atomic bomb being dropped? Do you remember anything about that?
In August, I guess at Fort Dix.
Okay.
Yeah.
Was it memorable for you? Do you remember hearing about it
I
at
was
all,
so
or?
glad the war was over. The impending invasion would have been so costly. Not me.
Sure.
I'm sitting up here, away from, not even over there. I'm just bringing stuff in. But oh God, that was a tremendous relief to know that the bombs were going to shorten the war.
Yeah.
Even though the Japs were, a couple weeks before they made up their mind to surrender.
Well, it took a second bombing to help them decide.
But there wasn't a single solitary person I talked to that didn't think it was the best thing could have happened to us, the bomb. I know we're being chastised now occasionally.
So now we're post VJ Day. Now you're Kansas, you said?
Topeka.
Topeka, Kansas.
Yeah.
Okay, so did you you stayed in the military? You said,
Oh yeah.
Okay,
yeah.
so you
War
have
was
to
just
re-up?
barely over.
Okay.
And anyhow, at Topeka, then only there 3-4 months, I think. I don't know. Anyhow, they were going to close base down, ATC base. So they shipped, I guess, half of us to Westover Air Force Base in Massachusetts, and the others to the West Coast.
Okay.
So we wound up at Westover in 1946. I was flying routes out of Westover. We were flying into Europe,
Okay.
Frankfurt. We covered the North Atlantic as far south as Bermuda
Okay.
with any trips that came up, including Thule. Well, not Thule at the time, Goose Bay, Iceland. In 48, in July, I don't know where we had been, come back from the flight. We normally get 1 day off for every 3 or 4 days you're going. And I reported back in, and they said, go home, pack. You're leaving, you're going back to Germany. You're going to fly to Berlin, so okay. So we went in July. I flew my first trip out of Frankfurt on the, I think, 1st August.
Okay. And what kind of supplies were you bringing into
Whatever
Berlin?
they needed in Berlin, everything.
So
They needed everything.
Mhm.
Flour, food.
Okay.
I was there. I flew 116 missions, trips, and I left the middle of January 49.
Wow. Okay.
And I had flown 116, and they flew until May when the Russians threw in the towel, and then they continued to stockpile the airlift until the 30th of September, and then it was disbanded.
Okay.
But in that time, the whole airlift from 24th of June 1948 until 30 September 49, the airlift with the British had airlifted 2.7 million tons of stuff.
Wow.
And 77,000 plus flights.
Wow.
That's
amazing.
You know, 2/3 of what we took in was
Coal?
coal.
Yeah, because
They needed the coal.
the other pilot I was talking to, that's all he was flying was just
Yeah.
coal.
I never flew anything but out of Frankfurt.
Okay. Yeah.
It was
Yeah.
that was the best flying I ever did, and for the simple reason, when you fly a transport mission back then with not this but a 54, out of Westover to Harmon in Newfoundland,
Okay.
then to the Azores, then to Frankfurt or Burtonwood in England. You flew one takeoff, one landing, 5 hours to Harmon. And then you took off and you went to the Azores, one takeoff, one landing, 8 hours.
Wow.
And you left there and you wound up in Frankfurt, 8 hours again, one takeoff, one landing. In the airlift out of Frankfurt, we were getting one landing and takeoff every 2 hours.
Wow.
Because it was 2 hours up and 2 hours back.
And I think he said, how often were the planes taking off? They were just a few minutes apart?
A couple minutes apart, yeah.
Right.
They said they ultimately wound up getting airplanes, the British and us, into Berlin about every 45 seconds. Somebody was landing there.
Wow.
The Brits they didn't have the equipment we did, but they did 1/3 of the lift.
Okay.
And they were using Goonie birds and flying boats, and then later converted bombers. But we settled down after a while with C-54s, one airplane. But they did their share, believe me. The French had no airplanes at all.
Right.
But when we built Tegel, they operated Tegel.
Right.
That was their part of
Right, because they wanted,
Yeah,
they needed
it was
in on
good.
action. Yeah. So
I-
you were at Tempelhof?
Yeah.
Okay, and that's where you flew in and out of.
Yeah.
Now, how frequently, I know there was a rotation where you just got on the bottom of the list, and when your name came to the top again, you were
Yeah.
flying. About on average, how frequently would you have to fly? I know it was
Okay.
weather dependent, but
Every group over there had different standards by which they flew.
okay.
Our group, the 513th, you flew one mission, which it was two. Okay, you had a 12-hour plus crew duty time day. So you went out, went up, and came back 4 hours roughly,
Okay.
could be a little more. By the time you refueled and reloaded, you made another flight.
Okay.
And then you came back.
Right.
You had 12 hours off.
Okay.
So then after 12 hours, you went out and you flew 2 more trips.
Okay.
Then you had 12 hours off.
Okay.
Then you come back, you flew 2 more trips, which made 6.
Right.
And then you had 3 days off.
Okay.
That was our group's.
So you had a pretty regular rotation.
Oh, yeah.
And did you usually fly the same time of day every day? I mean, was your duty?
No.
Okay. So that rotated.
You could, any 24 hours a day.
Okay. Now, you were off for 3 days. Did you go and travel around Europe and sightsee? What did you do on your time off?
Bob Roller, my co-pilot, incidentally, I had him for 96 of my trips.
Wow.
Very unusual. Matt's and ATC never had a set crew, but I had Bob as a co-pilot for 96 of my trips. He got sick and I lost him, and I finished the last 10 trips with other co-pilots. But Bob, I came to the other aircraft commander and myself. We took our 3 days off and got a couple-day pass, leave, and we went to Switzerland.
Oh, nice.
Later on in the lift, before the end of the year, we moved, the airlift people moved 2 squadrons out of Frankfurt and Wiesbaden up to Sully and Fossberg in the British zone. Their flight was only an hour in.
Oh,
So they could make
more trips.
more trips in 12 hours or whatever it was. Because their round trip was only 2 hours.
Okay.
Just about double hours,
Right, yeah.
or half of hours, so they could fly more. They got a lot more in. But it was all right. That's where they were landing at the new airport. We got alerted, go out, eat breakfast. Since it was all hours of the day, we were at a place, lived at a place called Betz Barracks. It was in German Army post. And they had a mess hall there. But they only served meals 5 to 7 in the morning and 11:30 to 1 in the afternoon or whatever, and then supper. But when we were alerted at 3 o'clock in the morning, so they set up a flight kitchen right on the flight line at Frankfurt. And you go out and you eat breakfast, get on the airplane and go. You landed in Tempelhof. Initially, we were there about 40 minutes, and they got it down to about 30 minutes. And then after the 13th of August, when General Tunner got caught up in this thing, they made some changes after that. Before that, when you land, you went to flight operations, checked the weather, filed a clearance, come back on the airplane and left. After these 2 friends of mine who were on Tunner's staff, Colonel Foreman and anyhow, he's another colonel, they come up with some good ideas. We never left the airplane's wingtip. You got out the airplane, that's as far as you ever got away. Because a Jeep came along with a weatherman in it, and he gave you the weather. Another Jeep followed him, he gave you your clearance. And then the snack bar, the rolling snack bar.
Heard about the donuts, huh?
With the girls and the
donuts
and the
donuts?
coffee.
Yeah, I heard about them.
So you never left and 30 minutes was normal ground time then.
Okay.
So you came back, you went back while they were reloading and fueling, and you had another breakfast.
Okay.
That's flight line. So you'd be on the ground maybe an hour and a half. Then you went back and you flew your second trip. When you come back from the second trip, you got on the truck and went back to the barracks.
Okay. Yeah,
They had decided to set the rotation at 100 trips.
Okay.
And I was
You were already over.
The initial people went over, not counting the people who were stationed there. They had no limit.
Okay.
But for rotation, it was 100 trips. But most of us who had gone over in July and August were past 100 when it came out. So we almost immediately went home.
Okay. And where did you go from there?
back to Westover.
Okay. And how long did you stay at Westover?
Until 52, May 52, I was transferred to PCS back to Frankfurt. So I was there 18 months and then came home and came to Dover.
Well, what was Dover like back then?
Primitive.
Yeah.
They were building it.
Right, because it was pretty new then.
Yeah. Oh,
It
yeah.
was the beginning.
Well, it had been a base since the war, during the
Okay.
war. But they had just reactivated it.
Okay.
And the 1607th Air Transport Wing was here.
Okay.
And there were 2 squadrons on the base, but no airplanes. That's how new it was. I was in the 21st, and then the 1st squadron was the other one.
Okay.
And I think it was about February and in January that we went out and picked up our first airplane.
Oh, okay.
Yeah.
And so where did you live on base? Did they have barracks for you or
Capitol Green.
Capitol Green?
Oh, there's nothing at the base.
Yeah.
The only housing at the base was for the wing commander and his deputy.
Okay. And
Two-
what
two-
was your jobs? What job
Flying.
did you do while you were there? Just flying?
Flying, same thing.
Okay.
Runs across the Atlantic again, and stateside work.
Okay.
And then during our time here, we did a couple SAC support missions. We did them out of Westover too, the SAC support. Yeah, but that was it. And then in '60, there was a in the mid '50s they took me off the line.
Okay.
There was an accident at Harmon. 124 went in, big, and they thought they needed experienced pilots on the ground to the transport control center, and I was one of the unlucky ones. They pulled me off the line. I got to fly 1 trip a month after that.
What were you flying when you were at Dover? The 54 still?
54s, and then in 55, 54, 55. See, I don't know which one of the two. They sent us to Palm Beach and to check out and fly 124s.
Okay.
That was it.
Okay. So then when you were pulled off the line, were you doing like air traffic control or what? Okay. And how long
The
did
Transport Control Center. We were coordinating center
Okay.
to make sure that our airplanes were fueled, cargo ready,
Okay.
and then we alerted the crew and bingo, and take care of transient flights through. Same thing to make sure they were serviced. And that's what it was. I didn't like it.
Yeah.
It was
That's,
shift work.
yeah.
I still didn't like it. But it was not enough flying.
Yeah. So then you said you retired in 61?
Well, in '60, I was sent up to Goose Bay.
Oh, okay.
And same thing,
Right.
transport control. And because I was a reserve officer, and the regulations stated no reserve officer could serve more than 20 years on active duty, unless you had a real specific skill that they was in short supply. Pilots dime a dozen. They sent me home and retired me in August, August
Okay. 61.
1960.
What rank had you achieved at that point?
I was a captain. I never got my promotions on active duty and this is where I realized the value of education.
Yeah.
You know, you got a job open, and here's a guy that's got a high school education, and here's a guy that doesn't have high school. Who are you going to take?
Yeah.
So I knew it kicked me. But I was happy. We had a good life in the military.